स्टार्ट कर सकते हैं अभी. So, a very good morning to all of you. We are continuing the Forestry Optional Crash Course here, and we are now going to start lecture number 3. Before I do so, the people can settle down. Maybe some of you are new and you have just started the preparation for the Forest Optional. Okay, so here again we can just summarize that what we have seen overall so far. So those of you who are new and who are watching this for the first time, you should again take time out. So there have been orientation lectures that have already been done. Okay, mapping of the syllabus we have seen previously, and in there is lecture 1 and lecture 2 that you also can have a look at, okay, as to how to approach the forestry optional. Now in these lectures we had seen the basics of silviculture, okay, its definition, what is silvics, and how the knowledge of silviculture and silvics is important for afforestation programs in India. That we have already seen. Then we had seen forests. How do we classify forest types in India? I hope by now this part is familiar to you. And then in the next part we had discussed related to international and national initiatives for conservation of forests in India. And then we had also started the discussion on the locality factors, for which we are going to continue today as well, right? So again, when we see the locality factors, so there have been many questions on what are the factors which affect the locality or the site, right? So in that we generally have seen the division, for example, in terms of topographic or physiographic factors, division in terms of edaphic factors, division even in terms of climatic factors, which today we'll see in more detail, then even your biotic, which also is a subject for discussion for today, and then of course we can also mention the human, technological or the technical factors. All these factors influence the vegetation. And again, recapping from the previous class, we can talk about the topographic factors, right? How the slope influences the vegetation, how the aspect influences the vegetation, plus other related aspects, the configuration of land. By the way, we'll also have a discussion on this part. How does configuration of a land affect the vegetation? Because this is again a subtopic that we do in topographic. So again, and this will also help us again recap this whole part. This has already been asked as a previous question, that how does configuration of land impact? So here also we can mention the cases of central India, the cases of Western Ghats, and all the related aspects, so that we are very well and understand this dimension here. Okay, so we had discussed already how the slope impacts the vegetation, how the how steep slope, etc., how the aspect, how the altitude, how the latitude, and finally we condense all of this knowledge into the configuration of land. Okay, in edaphic, in the previous class we had already seen a broad question on how edaphic factors influence, okay, which directly right from the depth of the soil to the pH of the soil to the acidity or the basicity of the soil, how alkaline it is, to how many nutrients are available, okay. And then specifically talking of nutrient cycling, etc., we had seen the case of mycorrhiza, okay. Mycorrhiza its types, the benefits it gives, and overall a discussion on biofertilizers. In climatic, because this is where we had just started the discussion and then we had to continue it today. So here, right from the aspects of, let's say, temperature, okay, precipitation, for example, we can even say moisture. We'll even go to aspects of frost today. How is the impact of frost? And when we do the impact of frost, we'll see the types of frost. Every year you will see a question on frost being asked. Okay. Then even we can say snow. And when I say snow, put a star mark here, and even here itself you can write down Cedrus deodara. Okay. Cedrus deodara is the deodar species, and here the snow plays a very important part in the natural regeneration of Cedrus deodara. Okay. So from the very outset itself, there will be some aspects that you should keep in mind. Okay. For example, when we had discussed the altitude, latitude, so here also in the previous class we had seen diagrams that from the basic altitude to 1000 meters, 1500, 3000, 4500 meters, what are the different types of forests do we see in India? Okay, so these are the aspects that you should also understand. Fine. And then in climate, there has been a question that has been coming repeatedly. For example, what is microclimate? Okay. And how is that a very important part? Okay. For example, forests affect their own microclimate, right? So when we do the climatic factors today, we'll also have a discussion on microclimate, right? Now, biotic factors. So here we will see the aspects of the interactions between species. Okay. Then wild animals. So again, the impact of, let's say, grazing. Okay. Even the impact of invasive alien species. All these aspects, because we are talking of species interactions, is going to be covered here in biotic. Okay. And lastly, we will condense and define this overall part here, right? Human, or all these are socio-economic considerations related to locality factors, and then we'll move into site index. Okay. Site index, or let's say the site quality index. Because when you understand the locality factors, then you will understand what a site quality is and what is a site quality index, how it is measured. Okay. For example, why height happens to be an important parameter. We'll also see different graphs here, right, based on the height and how the whole site, etc., is doing in, right? So here, what are the factors which influence this? This also has been a recurrent question that is asked from us. Okay. The other topic that we'll also have a look at would be ecological succession. Okay. So even if you see the paper of 2023, there was a question on subclimax, which is nothing. Climax is the most final stage. By the way, ecological succession you also read in your environment in GS, right? However, for forestry, there are certain more technicalities associated with it, right? For example, what are the different ecological succession theories? Okay, right? Monoclimax theory, polyclimax theory, etc. We'll also have a look at, and then some case studies with the name of the species. Okay, and then questions like what are subclimax, etc. So this will overall give us a good understanding about how to approach this topic. Fine. So let us go back to the slide. We are in the lecture number 3, right? And here today we will see a lot of more previous year questions for all these topics, so that you also get to have a fair idea about how to write and attempt the sections here. Okay. Those of you who are new, you can know that we are for the people who are writing the mains of 2024, right? We have a Forestry Optional Foundation course wherein you have all the important lectures. Okay. So here that is one. So you can have a look at. If you have any doubt what you want to join, etc., you can just contact us on the number on the website. Plus, in addition, there is also a test series that can help you out in the answer writing part. Okay. Now let us talk about the aspects related to this. So this is the discussion we want to proceed with. Okay. The edaphic, etc., these parts we had already seen in the previous class. Okay. Now here I'll just want to bring your attention back to this part here. This is a part we could not discuss in the previous class. Configuration of a land surface. So what I'll do, I'll pose a previous year question, and based on this previous year question, right, we will try to again revise the entire topic. The other aspects, altitude, latitude, slope, or the aspect, this we have already seen. Fine. So today our basic understanding will be based on how to attempt this part here. Okay. So here, those of you who are writing etc., you can just write the question down. I'll overall read this out once, and then I'll mention the question, and then we'll try to break this down. This will also give you an idea on how to break down, okay, the components and how to write the various dimensions of the question. So the question for us is, the question is configuration of the land surface. Configuration of the land surface has an impact on the local climate conditions and wind movement, which in turn has a bearing on the forest. Okay, and the question says explain. Now because we have already seen, so this for us is a direct keyword here, configuration of the land surface, okay, which reminds us that this is related to topography, and because we are seeing land surface, so of course you can bring in some elements of even edaphic factors. Now the question says this has an impact on the local climate. Okay, so the aspect of even microclimate can be touched upon here, right? Now even if the question says configuration of the land surface as a determinant or as an important topographic factor, explain. So you can talk about the local climate, you have to talk about the wind movement, how all of these factors are influenced, because this is going to impact how the vegetation of the forest is going to be. So the very first part is to understand the question, right? And on the previous parts also we will see one question each, so that we have a fair idea about how to attempt this particular topic here. Okay, so if you see this particular part, and now we'll try to break this down as to what can be done here. Okay, so few things that we can talk about, right, when we talk about how the topography how topography influences climate. So one important part is elevation, or simply said in terms of altitude variation. So the higher we go, right, there is going to be a temperature decline. So with increasing height, this is something we've already seen, there is a decrease in temperature. Okay, we can give example of even the montane forests, okay, or the other forests at higher altitudes, that here the temperature seen is less and the vegetation also varies. Now here you have to give example. Okay, for example, we had seen the species of, for example, oak, birch, okay, other pine species, etc. So that is how you can give example, and you can talk about one point of in this manner. Okay, and we'll break down each part here one by one, so we'll have a look at. So one is elevation. Within this we can also talk about slope, and we can also talk about aspect. Okay, in slope we had written in the previous class about Western Ghats, so I'm just writing example overall of Western Ghats. Okay, so what we had seen, steep slope, and we had also seen a normal stabilizing slope. In case of a very steep slope, because there is going to be a lot of water runoff, water would not get stored. Okay, so because of that there will be very less vegetation, and in fact we'll see more hardy species, remember, right? So we had seen in a steep slope we would generally see more acacia like species, okay. Whereas if the slope is gentle, and which would allow for the water to get retained, right, more availability of water is going to be there. So here you will find more vegetation, okay. So we had seen even the case of bamboo, etc., in the gentler slopes, right. Other point was the aspect, right. For example, this was the mountain. The part which receives more sunlight, of course, will have more vegetation, okay. So that is the very first part that we'll have a look at, that how this is going to influence the climate, okay. So this is first part, right, because the aspect is going to influence some important parts, okay. This is going to influence the drainage. This is also going to influence the part related to soil depth, and this will also influence the erosion rate. All these aspects you can mention while you write about it, okay. So in the topography itself, these are the points that we can write about, okay. Other than that, because here you have to talk about the climate and other aspects of this, so here also some part we can talk about, okay. That, one second, let me write the question remaining same. Other parts, for example, I can take some aspects of wind. The question directly talks about microclimate, so I can even expand on the aspect of microclimate, and again for all these dimensions we can write more points, okay. And for any of these questions, even if you mention a lot of these points, you will have more than the required content to write, okay. So here one by one we'll have a look at. When we're talking of wind, okay, you can mention the orographic patterns, okay. For example, there is a windward side and there is a leeward side. Windward side is of course the one which gets more rainfall, okay. The moisture laden winds are going to have more rainfall in this particular part. This part is known as the windward side, right. So orographic patterns, and leeward side is the one which gets very little moisture laden winds, so that is why less rainfall, and because of less rainfall, very less precipitation that happens here, okay. So how wind also determines the precipitation or the local climate is how we can talk about it, okay. This is for the basic mountains, but apart from the orographic patterns, we can even talk about the valley winds, okay. Already we know of a term known as temperature inversion that we just have seen in the previous part, okay. So even the valley winds, because we're talking of the wind part here, they also influence how the temperature distribution is in a period of time, okay. Then talking of the overall microclimate, fine. Microclimate is also influenced by this particular part, so you can even write how microclimate plays, or for example the impact overall on this condition, okay, through this, right. So here we can talk about that even, let's say in Silent Valley National Park, okay, or in the apple orchards, okay. Just a second, one or two example I'll give you. For example, if we take the case study of Silent Valley, okay, or let's say the apple orchards in Himachal, let's say Kinnaur, right. So the small changes in the vegetation patterns or in the land surface in these regions also influences the microclimate, okay. So microclimate is going to be influenced because of the local conditions. This also happens. Other than that, the formation of soil is also determined by the configuration of land surface, okay. And when I say soil, the other related parts in terms of the quality of soil, the availability of nutrients in the soil, the depth of the soil, the drainage pattern, etc., is also going to be determined by the configuration of the land surface, okay. So this is something very important, right. One good example I'll give you. For example, if I talk about shivaliks, okay. So because of the diverse configuration of land surface in shivaliks, you see a diverse range of forests. Okay, that is just one example. You can even give example of other, for example, alluvial floodplains. Okay, so even in these aspects we can talk about how the soil is ultimately influencing the vegetation, which is ultimately a determinant or a function of configuration of land surface. Fine. Then water availability. So when we're talking of water availability, right, so the configuration of land surface is going to impact the recharge of groundwater. It is also going to impact the aspects related to the water, how the watershed is. Okay, so you can give examples of, let's say, the drier regions, and you can also give examples of the regions which get a lot of rain. So for example, if I give Rajasthan, okay, where we find acacia related some species, right, or if we go for Western Ghats, there's a difference of water availability also. Okay, so that is also a factor which is going to be determined in this particular part, right? And lastly, when we have to see overall, if I have to say, so configuration of land surface has an impact because we are talking of the stands of the forest. We are seeing the differences in canopy, how the radiation is going to come in, etc. So when you combine all these factors here, so yes, overall the configuration of a land surface has an impact on the local climate. Fine. So that is one part also, because in the previous part we did not have much discussion on this part here, but you will see that this also is an important part as a topography. Okay, so from the previous year question also we get to know how to answer this question. Fine. These parts and diagrams, I am again emphasizing, the more you do it, the better it is. And again, these parts are going to get repeated in coming part also. So right from the very basic diagrams again is something you can definitely have a look at. Okay, latitude, slopes, aspect, these aspects we've already seen. Fine. Now let us discuss the climatic factors here. The solar radiation aspect we had discussed. Okay, but of course there were other parts, even the light part we had also discussed. Okay, we had also discussed this important part, right, the light demanders, the shade demanders, okay, and the shade bearing crops. Okay, but this is again a part you have to put a lot of efforts. Okay, for example, I just spoke about how snow plays an important part in the regeneration of Cedrus deodara. Cedrus deodara is a shade bearer species. Okay, so that is how one by one you will have to keep on writing and remembering these important parts. Now, this was also a part we had already seen. What are the factors which determine the temperature? I'm not going to now again explain. You can just watch the video for this. All these points are self-explanatory, right from winds, mountains, cloud, vegetation, right? These are all the aspects which determine the temperature. The effect of global warming, this was the last part we were discussing. So let me just continue a discussion based on this, and then of course we go into the different adaptations that are there, and then the aspects of frost. Fine. Now, we had discussed in the previous part that of course the global warming was happening. To best way to prove that, or what are the facts which support this? So two major things that we have seen is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the World Meteorological Organization, which publishes something known as, let's say, the Greenhouse Gas Bulletin. Okay, it also has its other publication, but this again is one of the main flagships that it has. IPCC has its assessment report. Okay, so for example, the most recent one, we can say the 6th assessment report, and what it talks about, right? So in the 6th assessment report, the most prominent man-made greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide, has surpassed even 420 parts per million. Okay, increase in greenhouse gases means, for example, when we say we have the incoming solar radiation, which is short in wavelength. Again, you have already done this in your environment, but in paper 1B there is again a part where we talk about climate change, pollution, global warming, etc. So we'll again revise that there. Okay, this is the part of Earth. So you have an incoming solar radiation, and then there is an outgoing solar radiation. Okay, right. The outgoing solar radiation is the one that is getting trapped by the layer of greenhouse gases. Okay, so now when you see the term effect of global warming on forests, so note that number one, the forests are our carbon sinks. Okay, but it is the forests which are getting, so there is a lot of deforestation, there is increase of forest fires happening. Remember, we have seen examples of Amazon, Australia. So the carbon that has already been stored will now start to get released, and carbon dioxide in this case is a greenhouse gas. Okay, of course you have other greenhouse gases like methane, like fluorinated gases like NOx. Okay, so both these parts, one, individually the greenhouse gases is increasing, and both IPCC and WMO have spoken about that how in the last 150 or let's say 170 odd years, so let's say post 1850 to now, there has been greater than 1.1 degree Celsius temperature increase, 2023 being the warmest year. Okay, so these are some of the facts that you can remember. Okay, now same thing, rising temperature creates drier conditions in forests. Okay, plus there is a mild winter, increasing pest population, pest part also I had told you, and there is a longer fire season. So there are three things to remember here if we are talking about this particular part, right? In the aspects of global warming, right, what is happening? So what we saw, that we just saw what are the facts related to it. Okay, in effects there are three things we are seeing majorly. Okay, so one major part that we directly see as a consequence of global warming is there is increasing drier conditions. Okay, mild winters, which also help the pest population, and lastly, okay, the overall longer fire seasons. So this will contribute to one, even more forest fires. Okay, overall vegetation being less, plus whatever is already existing is prone to more pest attacks. Case in point being the increasing locust attacks, which is attributed to this. Amazon, Spain, Australia, these are some of the regions where this is being seen very predominantly. Okay, so this is first of all a direct consequence that we see of increasing temperatures, right? Forests are burning more frequently and over larger areas, releasing carbon and destroying the important carbon sinks. Okay, that is one. More carbon, it accelerates, so again there is a loop that is getting created. Okay, we have seen many virtuous loops. Okay, so the loop generally being that one, there is more carbon dioxide released because of burning of this, more global warming, more forest fires, more release. Okay, so that is also something that you can overall draw. Okay, that global warming leads to increased temperatures leads to drier conditions lead to more forest fires, forest fire leads to more carbon dioxide leads to more global warming, increased temperature, drier conditions. This is how you can draw. Okay, so overall if you want to mention, so just a second. Okay, you can try to box this, something of this sort. Global warming leads to increasing temperatures, it leads to drier conditions leads to more forest fires leads to more CO2 getting released, because carbon sinks are no more carbon sinks, they become carbon source, and because of more carbon dioxide there is more global warming. So this is a feedback loop or this is a cycle. Okay, and because of this, of course, more problems they start. Fine. So in questions like this, you can always recourse to and use this particular part to highlight here. Effect of global warming on forest, that is something that we have seen. Fine. And we also had a mild small discussion on this part here, that can climate change change the period of phenology. So here we had seen some important parts, that of course there were in many cases shorter seasons, and in some cases they were longer seasons. Okay, and here I'll make you write down some example also so that you remember. Then we had also seen the other aspects related to the early onset or the early harvests that were seen. Fine. The delays in monsoons, and in addition to this, when you bring in the aspect of El Nino, how there were pronounced and more prolonged droughts, which means availability of water is getting a problem, is becoming a problem. Okay, so these were some of the aspects that were directly determining or changing or impacting the phenology also. So that is something that we can write and have a look at. Now here, before we move to the next part, because we had already seen this in some detail, okay, so here there are a couple of points I want you to write down so that we have an idea about how to attempt this particular part. Okay, so the question that we have for us is with respect to this. Okay, what is the aspect of climate change and how can climate change impact the phenology? Okay, the question, so you can just write down a couple of points related to this. Okay, so the very first point you can write down, the climate change leads to changes in the duration of seasons, changes the duration of seasons, which impacts flowering, leafing and fruiting, which impacts flowering, fruiting, leafing. Okay, so first example we'll write. In Europe, species like cherry blossoms and oak trees, cherry blossom and oak trees have been observed to bloom earlier, In India, this example we have seen in the previous one, the rhododendron. In India, rhododendron in Himalayas has shown early blooming. And why is early blooming happening? Because of this rising temperatures because of global warming. Okay, so the changes in the season is happening, rising temperatures is leading to earlier blooming. Okay, early onset is because of increasing temperatures. So be it in Europe, the cases of, let's say, cherry blossom, and oak; in India, rhododendrons. So that is the first example that we'll write. Okay, that is one. Second is there is a delay in monsoon, which a broader point can be overall that we saw erratic rainfall, or we can say altered precipitation. For this you can write, and again see our timber species or the teak species, they are going to be sensitive to the changes in the rainfall patterns. So if that happens, this will also change or impact. Okay. So you can write down changes in rainfall patterns can disrupt. Changes in rainfall patterns can disrupt the normal timing of phenological events. It can disrupt the normal timing of phenological events. Okay, so here one example that we can give for the second part is any of the teak species you can mention. Okay, for example, we say teak, Tectona grandis, Tectona grandis is sensitive to changes in monsoon patterns. It is sensitive to changes in monsoon patterns. Okay. Next part you can write. Now, because of increasing temperature, what is also happening? There is a change that is also seen. So you can write in temperate regions. Now temperate regions which were slightly colder will also become more warm. So the the growing season in these regions is going to extend. So we will see extended growing seasons. Okay. So one line we'll write. In temperate regions, warmer temperatures can extend the growing seasons. Okay. And when this happens, this is going to link to the next part. See, the leaves are going to be there for a very long period of time, and because of that, they will be subject to even frost damage. Okay, they'll be subject to, or they're susceptible to frost damage. Right, because see, these are temperate conditions. So after the period of extended growth, there will be an onset of frost, and because the leaf is going to be there for a very extended period of time, it is going to be prone to, what we'll now see is, it is going to be prone to frost. Okay, that is one. That is also one example that we can write here. Okay, and one more point, or one last point we can also write. Flowering of mango. Even the flowering of mango, this is also one example also extra that we can write. Again, this part of Magnifera indica. The flowering of mango is also sensitive to changes in winter temperatures. Is also susceptible to changes in winter temperatures. Okay. So then what we see overall, the climate change is impacting the functioning in the ecosystem. Okay. In ecosystem functioning, both the parts, productivity is also going to be changed, right? Decomposition is also going to change. Now, for example, decomposition is faster at higher temperatures if the soil is rich in nitrogen. But for example, in cases you will have extremes of temperature. When we say climate change, extremes of temperature, okay, so even the higher temperatures are also going to happen, and the cold will be even more colder. So decomposition impacted productivity, this is also getting impacted. Okay, then here also the diversity or the richness of the species will also be impacted because of changes in precipitation and all the related patterns, right? So even at a regional scale or even at a local scale, climate change is going to cause a lot of variation that is going to be seen. Okay, So that is also one part that you can talk about. Okay. The next heading is adaptations. We'll see adaptations also, for example, in other areas, right? But just for reference, because when we say what happens in harsh climates, okay? So here there are certain adaptations that we get to know, okay? For example, if there is too much rainfall, so I'm just writing here excess rain, okay, or we can say waterlogged conditions, there are certain adaptations that are seen. Similarly, if there is too less rainfall or drought-like conditions, okay, so of course there are two kinds of stress that a plant faces. There are biotic stresses, there are abiotic stresses, okay, and for this there are certain adaptations, okay, that are there. So for example, if there is excess rainfall, there is a lot of waterlogged conditions. So here also, let's say if I take the example of mangroves, now try to recall the species that we had seen for mangroves, okay. So what specific adaptations do we remember of mangroves? So for example, we can say pneumatophores, which is the aerial breathing roots. We can talk about the buttress roots, okay. We can talk about vivipary. So one is of course buttress roots, we can say stilt roots, prop roots, okay. All this is the aspect of excess rainfall here, okay. So what happens in this case, right? In case of pneumatophores, these are air breathing roots, otherwise there will be a rotting and the oxygen would not be available. Buttress and stilt roots, etc., are there to provide support to the mangrove species, okay. You'll understand this even in more detail when we do the silviculture of mangroves, although in the basic aspects of GS you would have already done, so I'm expecting that you will be familiar. Vivipary is, for example, you have a normally in a tree, what happens, a seed will fall and then the natural regeneration will happen, fine. Of course there is also artificial regeneration, but this is how the natural regeneration happens. In vivipary, what happens, if the seed were to fall down, there is already a waterlogged condition, the seed will get destroyed, okay. So germination of the seed happens in the tree itself. Seed germinates in the tree itself, okay. So that is one example that we can say. Now talking of droughts, think about the xerophytes, okay. Okay, think about, for example, we see cactus, okay. So there are here also certain adaptations, okay. In both cases we can talk about sunken stomata. Stomata is regulating the opening and closing of leaves, and the adaptation is ideally to regulate or optimized evapotranspiration, okay. Minimize the evaporation losses, minimize the transpiration losses. So they can have a sunken stomata, okay. They can have overall a deep root system so as to better access, okay. There is a fleshy stem, okay. Then the leaves are reduced to thorns, okay. So even this aspect is also seen. So there are various type of adaptations. We see different adaptations in animals, similarly we see different adaptation in plants, okay. So that is also one thing that to keep a mind to, okay. Now in this adaptation part also there are few points that you should definitely remember, right? So here we will just write a couple of points, that what are the various let's say parts that you have to know, okay. So here just write down, and I think we are talking about how, because of increasing stresses, okay, what are the different adaptations that happen. okay, or adaptation, or even you can say responses to the biotic or the responses to abiotic stress. Fine. So we can say even leaf shedding happens. Okay. There is sunken stomata. Okay. There is a thick cuticle or a fleshy stem. Okay. In fact, the leaf shedding, you can also link this how to even in deciduous plants or the forest, this also keeps on happening. Now, the combination of this can be one of the example of how these are responses to drought tolerance, like leaf shedding, sunken stomata, thick cuticle. So here a couple of lines you can write down. Okay, so one example we'll write here is Acacia nilotica. Okay. So you can write Acacia nilotica has a thick cuticle, and a sunken stomata. Acacia nilotica has a thick cuticle and a sunken stomata, minimizing water loss in dry conditions. Minimizing the water loss in dry conditions. Okay. And second point, this is again linked more to the leaf shedding part here. You can write trees like teak. For us, teak will be Tectona grandis. Trees like teak shed their leaves during the dry season. Trees like teak shed their leaves during the dry season to minimize water loss, to reduce water loss. Okay. Now, see, this is one aspect, plus we also had a look at the temperature part. Okay. Now the temperature can be high temperature. You can have very cold temperatures. Even for both of them, I'll give you examples. Examples I'm writing with pink, so I hope you're able to visually see that. So for example, here we can talk about the eucalyptus. For cold, we can give examples of rhododendrons. What is the kind of adaptations that they show? So just one line each you can write. So for the first part, eucalyptus trees, they produce heat shock proteins. Eucalyptus trees produce heat shock proteins. Okay, heat shock proteins to protect cellular structure from damage. To protect the cellular structure. And by the way, when we see about frost, okay, we'll see both internal factors and we'll also see external factors. Okay, in the internal factors, it is again what is there in the cell. Okay, similar part we'll also see frost, that how certain species are able to be frost resistant. It is because in the cellular structures they will have, let's say, some part. Fine. So we'll also just have a look at. So just remember, here we are saying the eucalyptus trees produce heat shock proteins. Okay, they produce heat shock proteins to protect cellular structures from damage. And when we say rhododendrons, you can write rhododendrons in the Himalayas, they produce anti-freeze proteins. They produce anti-freeze proteins. Okay, that is how they are able to survive, okay, in the freezing temperatures. Okay, that is how they are able to survive. in these freezing temperatures. Okay, one more part I'll tell you. For example, when we say there is a photosynthesis happening, okay, there is also a part in your syllabus known as physiological factors. By the way, all this content is relevant to the physiological factors. Okay, now when I say physiological factors, there is also something, of course, we know, that is photosynthesis. Now here there are different pathways in the photosynthesis. Okay, for example, we can say there is a C3 pathway, C4 pathway. I'm talking about the drought and the arid regions. Here you have something known as the CAM pathway. Okay, so for example, if I give you example of something that is also mentioned in your NCRT, Optunia, the prickly prick plant, it has a CAM pathway. The CAM pathway is a part of how the photosynthesis is done. So here the idea is to ensure photosynthesis will also happen, but at the same time the water conservation will also happen. Let me explain this to you. So see, there is always a trade-off that will happen during photosynthesis, right? Because there will be opening of stomata. Okay, if the leaf has a larger surface area, more and more evapotranspiration is going to happen. But if the stomata does not even open, how will the CO2 and the other aspects will also get taken up? Okay, so the regulation of this is going to be very important. So that is why plants like Optunia, they have very optimized CAM pathways. So they don't do the usual C3 or the C4 pathways. They have specific CAM pathways which helps them to ensure water conservation, but at the same time go for photosynthetic efficiency. And again, you can link all these parts to climate also, because in climate we are seeing the aspects of one, climate change. In climate change, the deserts are prone to more desertification, right? So you should know these examples, right? I'll make you write down these points. The people who do not know, okay, maybe are not aware, so you can write. CAM pathways help in reducing water loss, full stop. It is adapted to arid conditions. It is adapted to arid, ARID, arid conditions, seen in Optunia. Optunia is known as the prickly pear cactus. Here just one line, the CAM plants take carbon dioxide at night. The CAM plants take carbon dioxide at night to minimize the water loss during hot, dry days. Okay. Another example I'll give you, and with that we'll move to the next part here. In this part, I think I'd mentioned root here. Okay, so that they have a deep root system, and we've been talking about Rajasthan, we've been talking about arid regions. So for example, if I give you the example of khejri trees, okay, remember Prosopis cineraria. So you also see that happening in this. Okay, so if you don't have space here, let's say I'll write it here, Prosopis cineraria. These are your khejri trees. Okay, so here we will write one line. In arid regions, plants like khejri, that is Prosopis cineraria. Okay, there is only a single N, so you can just change that, CINE. RARIS, Prosopis cineraria. Okay, develop deep root systems to access groundwater. They develop deep root systems to access groundwater, which helps them to mitigate these harsh drought conditions. Okay, so that is one part that you can mention and write about. Fine. Okay, so the adaptations I hope are clear to you, and this is again, as we move along you'll see even more different kinds of adaptations, but till now whatever points we have seen, examples, be it the CAM pathway, the example of Optonia, okay, examples of mangroves and the specific keywords. By the way, remember the different 2 species of mangroves I made you write down, try to recall. Okay, here in drought like conditions you also have a lot of points. Fine. So adaptation is again a topic that you'll see again when we discuss the ecology of forests in paper 2B, also even in 1A right now we'll also see. In fact in 1B also we'll again have a look at some of the adaptations, so keep that in mind. Okay, right. Now within the climate part, again one part I had been speaking again and again is the aspect related to frost. Fine. So we'll see frost, we'll see the injuries because of frost that keep on happening. Okay, then what are the internal factors, okay, that lead to frost resistance, what are the external factors, okay, some name of the species also we'll write, what are the frost hardy species which are moderate frost hardy, and one what are the frost tender, okay, how what is the frost hole also we'll have a look at. Okay, and then we'll go into the aspects of snow. Okay, snow and snow, so let us have a look at, okay, in the frost. Fine. So when we are doing frost, there are few, or I'll just mention a framework how to just do this once, because you will see questions coming from frost. So let's say we are talking about frost. Okay, one of course is the basic geography, you have to just one line definition. Okay, second part is the types of frost, so we'll basically three types of frost, and here also we'll see something known as a frost hole. Okay, then we'll see the impact of frost, which basically means we'll talk about the frost injuries. Okay, then for example here also in the impact also we can say, okay, overall impact on the regeneration, and then we'll also have a look at, and these are 2 parts that have been asked many a times, the internal and external. Okay, the internal as well as the external factors which determine the frost resistance. So one is the damage that frost causes, then the frost resistance. Now when you see the type etc., just when we see the definition, here itself try to remember the name of species, frost hardy, frost tender. Okay, practice it a couple of times, you will be understanding it. For light we have already seen, some adaptations we have already seen, so the frost related species also you have to try and memorize. Okay, because these are the parts that will give you an idea, because generally what happens, people will only remember either the impact or this. If you remember this whole part, whatever part will come, and almost certain aspects have already been asked in every year. If you see almost every alternate year or every year you have seen questions coming from frost. Fine. So if you prepare it in this manner, if you already have your skeletons and structures, that is going to help you. So that is the first part we'll have a look at, and we are talking about frost, right? Now one by one, if I were to talk to you about this particular part, okay, so here let me go back to our part here. Okay, so the first heading that you can write down with in this part here is the types, and then we'll talk about the species just after that. So what are the types of frost that we generally get to see? Okay, so that is one thing that you can write down. Now in this part, right, so here we'll write about, so just one line you can write down. What is frost? For the frost part we'll write down, frost is defined as a fuzzy covering of ice crystals. It is defined as a fuzzy covering of ice crystals that forms or surfaces on surfaces at or below freezing. That forms on surfaces at or below freezing. Okay, you can write that down. Then that is the basic definition. Then we'll have a look at the types of frost here. Okay, the types can be, there is a radiation frost, there is a advective frost, okay, and then we also have a ground frost. So you have three types of frost. One, you have the radiation frost, you also have a advective frost, and you have a ground frost. Okay, so just one line each, and this is again a static part. So here we'll just know what is meant to be known, and then we'll go into these important factors here, right? In radiation frost, you can write down again, remember this happens on a clear night sky. Okay, so just one line. Okay, that radiation frost occurs in a night. Radiation frost occurs in a night with a clear sky. It occurs on a night with a clear sky. The name is radiation. Okay, so it is because of this particular part, okay, due to loss of heat by radiation. Okay, so again I'll repeat the definition here, that radiation frost occurs in night. Okay, just the keywords, if you remember: night, clear sky. Again, remember this question, by the way, has already been asked in prelims. If you already have a clouded sky, there's a lot of clouds, the radiation would be getting trapped, it will not be able to escape. Okay, and because if it is going to get trapped, the temperature is going to be warmer, which will not lead to the formation of radiation frost. Okay, so that is why. So radiation frost, again, it is a night, okay, clear sky, because of due to loss of heat due to radiation, there is a radiation frost that is developed. Okay, if you have read the process of advection, you will be able to understand this, but overall just one line for advective frost. Okay, this is a frost. Advective frost is brought about by cold air. Advective frost is brought about by cold air from the nearby regions. It is the frost that is brought about by the cold air from the nearby regions. And then the third part that we have to write is, okay, that is the ground frost. And in the ground frost, the name also tells you the freezing is happening in that ground level area. Okay, so here you can write down where the freezing happens in the ground level area. That is where we see the ground frost. Okay, so if we go back here, we have seen the basic definition, we have seen the types. Okay, so here again, remember radiation, advective, and ground. Okay, that is one. Plus I'll also show you one more thing, and then we move to the injuries caused because of frost and the damages that it does. Okay, there's also a term known as frost hole. Now this question was again asked in 2023. Again, this is again a basic thing that we have to know. First of all, this is how a frost hole looks like. From the very name itself, you can understand what the frost hole is going to be about. Okay, so when we see the frost hole, there is going to be a kind of a depression that is going to be seen. Okay, and it is a depression, or this is a low lying area where the cold air tends to settle. Fine, because of that there is going to be a lot of frequent frost formation. we can see this is a depression or a low lying area wherein the frost has begun to settle. The cold air has started to settle here. Okay, so this is one. Okay, because again these areas are lower in elevation compared to the surrounding. Cold air is going to, we know hot air is light, it will go up. Cold air is denser, it will settle down. Fine. So because of this, we will see a lot of parts here, right? Then how does frost affect regeneration, and even on what is the impact of frost? So of course we will see there can be frost injuries. Okay, there can be delayed growth, and there can be issues in species selection. So frost injuries, so of course when we are talking about very young seedlings, remember seed, seedling, sapling, pole, sawlog, right? So young seedlings will be very much vulnerable to frost. Okay, so that is a part here. Frost can also cause these freezing injuries, cell damage, or even death. Okay, which means the survival rate of these newly germinated seedlings is going to be impacted by the frost that is going to be present. Okay, that is one. There is going to be a delayed growth, which you can also understand. Okay, so if there is a repeated frost damage, okay, reduced vigor, okay, and these kind of, let's say, vegetation will not be able to compete with the vegetation which has already taken some precautionary measures with respect to the established vegetation. Okay, that is one. And then the frost prone areas, in these areas the choice or selection of species has to be as per the demands. So here we will prefer frost tolerant species. So the point to remember in the frost hole, one, we've seen what is a frost hole, right? This is what a frost hole looks. Okay, the cold air is going to seep in. These are areas at, or these are areas at a lower altitude, fine, or these are the low lying areas overall. And second, what is the effect of frost on the regeneration? Of course, there is an injury that happens to the seedlings, there is a delayed growth, and even the selection of species is going to be impacted because of how the frost is going to play a part here in this part. Okay, so that is one thing that you can overall have an idea about. Okay, that what this particular part is. Okay, then just like we have seen in the previous part, right, what the, just a second, let me go back here before we go to the, yes, so there are a lot of frost injuries that happen. Okay, right from, we just saw this can happen at the very young stage. Okay, even at the seed part, the seeds which have, or even at the seedling stage. Okay, so frost related injuries are going to be one important part. Okay, so here just a couple of points you can write down, and here for example we see forest crack also, we see heavings also. Okay, so many of the injuries are there, and because of that, and again the frost damage is also one, because of that we'll understand the resistance or the adaptations, okay, that the plant has with respect to how to take care of the frost. Okay, so in frost injuries a couple of points you can just write. Okay, one is frost heaving. Frost heaving. Heaving is where a part comes above. Okay, so frost heaving, for that you can just write down lifting of young seedlings, lifting of young seedlings above the soil, lifting of adult young seedlings above the soil. Okay, then excess frost damage can lead to, excess frost damage can lead to death of plant, death of plant. Okay, then all the stages that are there, so right from the seed to seedling, okay, to a sapling, to a pole, these are vulnerable to frost injuries. They are vulnerable to frost injuries. Okay, so when we talk about the cell damage, all these stages, especially the young stages, are very much prone. So this is how, again, our knowledge of the previous part is going to be important or handy to us. Okay, the frost damage is going to be there. So again, just like we see in the previous part, be it drought, be it let's say the aspect of extreme water logging, what are the different ways or the adaptations or how frost resistance can be seen. In this, you have to structure your answer in what are the internal factors and what are the external factors. Fine. So we'll just have a look at this, that what are the internal factors that contribute to frost resistance and what are the external factors. Internal, remember the very first thing I told you about is the cell. Okay, so just one by one. One is the size of the cell, then there is water content. Okay, now what we see, plants with smaller cells are more frost hardy as compared to the larger cells. And second, because again see, and second is of course, if a plant has a greater amount of water content, at low temperatures this water is going to get frozen and then it will again cause injuries. So we see the greater amount of the water content, the greater is the danger of intercellular or intracellular ice formation. Okay, so if the more ice formation is there, this can ultimately be a problem. So lesser amount of water is going to be overall helpful. Then there is a part of osmotic concentration. Okay, and again you read about osmosis. We also read about reverse osmosis. RO is the part related to how drinking water, etc. So here, if we say the greater the osmotic concentration within the cells, okay, which means from their own different kind of conditions, both higher or a lower concentration, there is a greater resistance to frost. Right, because here of course what will happen, the freezing point of the cell sap is going to be low. Okay, if the freezing point of cell sap is very low, the chances of internal ice formation is going to be less. Okay, so here also, higher or greater the osmotic concentration, the greater the resistance is. Fine. Then we move to how much water is permeable. Okay, so higher the permeability, greater is the resistance, okay, to the frost. And lastly, you have the water binding colloids. Okay, so here if you see again, the greater the water bonding colloids, higher is the frost resistance. Why? Because if the colloid is already there, it is going to bind to water, then this will happen. The water that is freely available, that can ultimately be frozen, will be very limited. So water bonding colloids, the more they are, they will bind to the water. Fine. Internal ice formation will be very less likely, and overall it will reduce the amount of water that can be removed from external ice. Internal factors are there and there are external factors. For internal factors, let us quickly recap. Okay, and ultimately you have to have a sheet like this which will help you revise. Okay, so what we are saying, internal factors, one is the size of cell. Just a second. Okay, size of cell is a factor. Water osmotic concentration. Okay, water binding colloids, right? These are the major factors that you can remember, and in addition, one is permeability to the water. But even if you remember 3 or 4, that is good enough. Now we move to what are the external factors, right? In the external factors, so of course, temperature is one factor. Fine. When second is light, and then we also have the nutrition or the mineral nutrition. Okay, all the 3 factors, these are external factors, so we'll have a look at. So very first factor is temperature, and throughout lecture we have been talking about temperature. So now if you see, a rapid fall in temperature is much more injurious than a gradual fall. Okay, even for these partially hardy plants. Okay, because it is the rapid fall in temperature. Let's say this is a graph, this is, let's say, around 8 degrees and this is somewhere around 2 degrees. If there is a very rapid fall in a very short span of time, so what will happen? It increases the danger of internal ice formation. Whereas if there is a very gradual fall, this is still better. Okay, of course, if there is a continued freezing for many days, there is a higher chance, okay, that the damage will happen. So first factor is temperature. So here two things we have seen in temperature, one is gradual and one is a rapid fall. Second, when we are talking of light, in light, for example, lesser the duration of light, okay, the greater is the frost hardiness. Okay, because what you will see, if there is a reduced photo period, remember now what is photo period? It is related to the duration of sunlight. If this is already very less, what will happen? And if the temperature is also very less, there will lead to cessation. Cessation means stopping the growth. The growth also will not happen. Okay, so if the growth does not happen, whatever sugars or let's say the carbohydrates that are stored, remember C6H12O6, this is converted into sugar. Okay, it means increasing frost resistance. Fine. So whatever was already stored is going to be consumed, which will lead to higher frost resistance. So lesser the duration of sunlight, okay, greater the frost hardiness. Otherwise, third part is nutrition of minerals. Okay, so see, whatever we are seeing, whatever is going to promote the vegetative growth is going to reduce the frost hardiness. If there was more light available, there was more vegetation, that would have led to a problem. So the less availability of light leads to more frost hardiness. Similarly, when we talk of the mineral nutrition, okay, nitrogen, if this is present, nitrogen is going to accelerate the development, okay, accelerate the vegetative growth, and here also we see it will reduce the frost hardiness. Okay, whereas when we apply potassium, phosphorus, etc., which will mean more vegetative growth, this will lead to increased. Okay, so whatever is going to stimulate the vegetative growth is going to reduce the frost hardiness is also one part that we have understood till now. Okay, so that is just one example that we can talk about in this particular part here. Okay, that we can know that what is this being referred to as, right? We'll talk about this part in the coming slides and the coming lecture here. Okay, frost hole also, how does it impact the frost affected regeneration? This also is something that we have seen, and how does a frost hole look and operate like is also something that we have seen. Fine. So till now I hope you have been able to understand the aspect of frost here. Okay, okay, just a second here. Okay, now moving on, we'll also discuss snow and then I'll make you write down some important parts here. 1 second. Okay, right. So when we see about snow and when we did discuss this, okay, so snow also again plays an important part in how the regeneration is happening. So again we'll also see the relationship which snow has. Okay, so snow, if we say just one line, then this is again all the crystallized ice that is going to be present. Okay, so here when we see, and just again we'll have a look at, okay, if the snow is present, so first of all, of course, this happens to be a source of water. Okay, snow is present, and again snow is going to be present on top of, this is the forest or the forest soil, on top of that there is a layer of snow. So this acts as a insulation material. Okay, snow acts as a insulation material, so this can also be helpful. So that is a positive aspect, this is also a positive aspect. Okay, if there is a heavy amount of snow, this can also lead to let's say this is a normal tree, there can also be a bending of the tree because of the accumulation of snow. Okay, this can also happen, right? Plus, individually, if you see, it can lead to breaking of branches. Okay, this can shorten the period of vegetative growth. Okay, the lowering of temperature, or even this can lead to this. Additionally, we know that at very low temperatures, for example, think about your refrigerators. What happens? The microbial activity will stop down or slow down. So here also, during snow or very low temperatures, the microbial activity is less. Just like in frost, even the snow will damage the cells. It will, the extent of damage will depend on the period of snow. Fine. The cambial activity, remember cambium we had seen, remember the cross section of stem, this was the bark, this was the part of cambium. So cambial activity, the growth part also is get affected. So snow also reduces the cambial activity. Okay, and then even the soil, it becomes physiologically dry. Okay, because of the layer of the snow that is going to be present, the penetration of sunlight, okay, then some of the important minerals may not get properly percolated, so the soil can become physiologically dry because of this presence. This can also be the effect of snow. So again, whenever you get a question like this, even be it the effect of wind or snow, etc., you have to write down the certain positives and also certain negatives. Okay, now when we talk about, so again, this is one part, and this is the most expected question and a very repeated question that has been asked. What is the importance of snow in regeneration of Cedrus deodara? Right, like we have seen a lot of previous year questions, we'll also see this. Fine. So whenever, the moment you see snow in your exam, this part should automatically click. What is the importance of snow in the regeneration of Cedrus deodara? Okay, so there are certain positive benefits. So for example, snow provides essential moisture retention. Okay, how this happens? Of course, what happens? There's a layer of snow. Okay, and slowly when this layer melts, of course water is going to get released, the moisture related content is going to be available. Okay, so here it releases water as it melts in the spring, so consistent hydration is available. So first point is related to availability of moisture, consistent hydration, first part that helps. Okay, it acts as an insulation. Already we have seen, if there is a layer of snow, it is going to be insulating in nature. And remember, Cedrus deodara, these are extremely cold conditions. Okay, so this insulation layer helps to safeguard against extreme cold. It acts as a shielding layer, right? It protects the soil's seeds. Okay, so that also helps. It also helps in seed stratification for germination. Stratification is again the layering of the overall produce, right? So there is a stratification that also happens in forest. For example, there is a tall forest, short forest. This is again a stratification. Same, this also helps in the stratification of seed for germination. Again, the protective layer of snow prevents desiccation. Okay, desiccation is if we have wind. Okay, if the movement of wind, and they are subjected to drying. Okay, the water moisture is going to be taken up by the wind. So desiccation is prevented by shielding from drying winds. Okay, and this is crucial because why? Cedrus deodara prefers moist environment, and this is how you can link point number 1 also, that first of all, snow provides consistent moisture. Second, the protective layer also prevents you not only from the extreme cold but also from the dry winds, prevents you from the desiccating effect. Okay, then erosion control. Okay, plus it stabilizes the soil. So this again overall helps you safeguard the seedlings. Okay, it also helps prevent against the soil loss, right? So overall what we see, the multifaceted role of snow helps in regulating the temperatures, seed stratification, okay, and ultimately this helps in successful regeneration of Cedrus deodara. Okay, this overall helps in the regeneration of Cedrus deodara. That is the overall part that you have to remember. Fine. So that is one. So again, if you have to recap, right from the effect, now I'm giving you this as a homework. Write down the positives. With positives, remember you can take the example of Cedrus deodara, and certain issues or negatives, which includes microbial activity damages the cell, reduces cambial activity, soil becomes dry, etc. Plus some of the physical damage that can happen. That is also something we can talk and write about. Okay, so that also is one part that we can say. Now moving on to the other part here, just a second, we can move to this part. Similar issue, we'll also have a look at wind. Okay, so wind is again going to be important for dispersal of seeds. Okay, with wind also, so again here also both things we'll have a look at. What are the positives they do, but there are what are the negatives of wind. Okay, so very important part is that we just saw. The positive is it is helpful in dispersal of seed. It plays an important part as a pollinating agent, right? Additionally, if you see, wind is going to even bring in carbon dioxide. That is helpful for photosynthesis. These are all the positive aspects, but there are negative aspects to wind also. So we are more interested to see the negative aspects also now. Okay, very simple. As you see this image, there is a bending of trees, excessive. So this can lead to bending, mechanical bending. This can even lead to uprooting of trees because of high winds. Okay, other than that, wind and water both play a abrasive, or both have a abrasive effect, which means can lead to soil erosion. Okay, again direct part, you don't have to do anything very important here. So this is also something we understand. Okay, other one we can also say, if there is a forest fire, etc., the forest fire will spread very rapidly because of wind. Okay, this can also happen here. Okay, rupturing, etc., can happen because of wind. And overall quality, because again branches will fall off. So overall quality, let's say if I'm talking of timber stands, excessive wind will lead to deterioration of the quality of those stands. That can also happen with wind. Okay, so here also what you can do, what are the harmful effects of wind, we can again segregate this into direct and indirect. Okay, so this is again something that you can do at your end. What are the harmful effects of wind? That can be done. This is again a very short, relatively short topic. Okay, for moisture, for example, when we see, okay, what is the role of moisture? So here again, if you see the infographic, from that only I'll just read out certain important points. Okay, and similar points you can think about for water logging as well. Okay, now for moisture overall, right, moisture is important for precipitation. Okay, the overall humidity balance is going to be important here. Okay, which ultimately is related to cloud formation, and which is also linked to, this is also linked to microclimate. This is also linked to the local, okay, aspect here, right? Now moisture is also going to be determined overall by the groundwater recharge capabilities. Okay, so this also is one important part that we can note in this. Okay, and excess of moisture, if there is a too much of moisture, that can also have a bearing. So that is also an important part. Now one or two things that you can write here, and again this is overall, that moisture is important for cell respiration, and cell can get moisture from various parts. It can be either rain, snow, frost. Okay, so this is there important. Moisture is overall a very important material and overall ingredient for carrying out photosynthesis. You know that CO2 plus H2O. So we need this. So moisture is going to be a very important part, and lack of moisture, harsh conditions which we had seen in drought are going to be very problematic. Okay. Again, something just for our reference, and again a term that we'll see again later on. We see, for example, drought. Okay. We had seen certain examples. Now try to recall. We had seen the example of Prosopis cineraria. We had seen the example of, for example, Optunia. Okay. This was, Optunia was the prickly pear cactus. Okay, we can even mention some of the acacia species, or even go to the extent of the drought hardy or species. Okay, even Azadi Rakhta indica, etc. So this is an adaptation that we had discussed. For example, large stems can store water. These have thick cuticles, fleshy stems, widespread root system. For that we had seen the example of Khejri trees, Prosopis cineraria. Spines are there instead of leaves, again to prevent or evapotranspiration. Thick waxy skin to reduce the water loss. Okay, all these adaptations, I hope this part is already clear to you. We've already discussed it. Fine. Now this is again an important term. When I explain this to you, please put a star mark also, because this we'll see again when we talk about nursery and in the part of seedlings. Okay. Now hardening off. Okay, just imagine, even if you don't know what is saying, you have, let's say, a seed, you bring it to the outside environment and it becomes hard. Just, I've not even explained to you what this means, just imagine it like that. And this is generally what happens. This is again a way of adaptation. So you had a very young seed in your own nursery in controlled condition. When you bring it out to the real world, okay, there will be certain changes. Okay. And again, just think about, we have a small children who don't know how the word is. The moment they come out to the word, they get socialized, they become hardened. Okay, in that sense. Okay, so let us understand. Hardening off allows plant to adapt from being in a protected, stable environment to a changeable, harsher outdoor conditions. Okay, so there is a change. So in a nursery, okay, what is happening? We have a stable, protected environment, but to be able to adapt, they are going to be moved to harsher outdoor conditions. Okay. Now, if they are suddenly placed outside, okay, this can directly check a plant's growth. Okay. So hardening off is overall a preferable mechanism. What is this? It's a natural process by which they will become adapt to harsher conditions, be it drought, be it cold or heat. Okay, so this is something that can happen. Okay, can be a natural hardening off also. Now if you see this line, this will make more sense to you. Gradual lowering of temperature. I'm not saying rapid will be problematic. Gradual lowering of temperature as a result of approaching winter, this will cause natural hardening off. So slowly and steadily the plant is going to adapt, okay, against any of these frost injuries, right? That is why when you see external or internal factors that influence the resistance to frost, this is what we can understand. Okay, so hardening again is for preparing seedlings in a nursery for planting out. What you can do, you can gradually reduce the watering, shade or shelter. So by, let's say, subjecting them to harsh conditions, what we are doing, we are preparing them into this hardened varieties. Okay, so this is a term that is also many times has been asked. Just simple define what is the hardening of. Okay, so we'll also have a look at, and then of course when you cover the aspects of natural and the aspects of regeneration, seedling, etc., this is also a topic that again gets repeated. Okay, fine. We'll also have a look at what is a microclimate. I've already told you that we wanted to discuss this, right? So it is a suite of climate conditions, but you're doing this, the name is micro, so this is to be done in a very localized area. Okay, microclimate is going to be done in a localized area. on the Earth's surface, right? And all these environmental variables, etc., be it temperature, light, wind speed, moisture, okay, they will provide a very meaningful indicator for the selection of habitat. All right. Now, this is again a diagram. You may not be able to draw the exact diagram, okay, slightly very detailed, but try to just understand the various factors that are going to be present and how each factor is interconnected or interrelated, okay. So, for example, if you see, you have air temperature, there is soil moisture, there is soil temperature, there is air humidity, there is wind direction and speed, okay. By the way, one of the questions that I've shown you in the first and the second class is that how even the forests have a bearing on the soil as well as the air temperature, okay. That is also something. Now, just for a moment, let us pause and just discuss this, and then we'll talk about the other aspects. So here we are talking of 5 aspects, 2 related to temperature, 1 of the soil, 1 of the air, okay. Then soil moisture, wind direction and speed. Wind also we just had a look at, okay. And air humidity. If you understand this and the interrelations that this has, again your answer, you can understand overall what the impact is going to be, okay. Now, talking about, for example, we have a tree, okay. Now, here some of the leaf, the litter is going to fall, and ultimately the soil will have more humus. So again, because of the kind of vegetation that is going to be present, it also can be as a shield layer. This will also impact the soil temperature. In fact, this will also reduce the soil temperature. Secondly, when we have a lot of dense vegetation in an area as opposed to the area which does not have forests, these areas are colder in nature, okay. So in that sense, even the air temperature is impacted by the forest. We can directly mention this, that how the air temperature can also be related, okay. Now, in fact, when I end the explanation part of this, I'll make you write down certain points for air and soil also, but for now, just understand there are many things, okay. You have an air temperature, there is a soil moisture, there is soil temperature. Now, just certain keywords I'll mention here, and for that you can also just get an idea how things are interconnected. Fine. Now, for example, I start with air humidity, okay. The humidity in the air is going to influence the rainfall and the fog, okay, fine. There is also wind direction and speed, okay. If the wind is blowing at a very fast rate, there is a dry wind, that will mean the drying or the desiccation impact is going to be high. This is linked to humidity that we feel in the air, okay. We can feel comfortable or uncomfortable because of the changing humidity. Air humidity can also influence rainfall and fog, fine. Then when we move to the soil temperature part and mix it with humidity, okay, this can also be responsible for pest or disease, okay. For example, the certain temperatures and air humidity is a very flourishing ground for the pests to move in. However, if the temperature is very low, then they will not be present, fine. Even the formation of dew with respect to how much humidity is there in the air, right. Then when you have soil temperature and soil moisture, germination, even nitrogen fixation, these are also going to be determined, okay. Then when we talk about air temperature, okay, so here how much, so if you have proper forest available, so in these regions there will be moderating impact, the temperatures won't be too high, okay. Mitigation of temperature peaks can happen, okay. If we have abundant, let's say, forest available, number one, soil moisture, soil temperature will be fine, plus there will be drought buffering also, there will be consistent precipitation in the areas, okay. And when you link it with wind direction, even the movement of dust, aerosol, and even I can add pollens, seeds, that is also going to be impacted here. So a combination of these factors, right, which is why land use, soil, water, the climate and landscape, all these things are very important. And in some sense you will understand climatic factors, vegetation, this can be the biotic factors, water, soil is the edaphic part, landscape morphology is what? Topographic. Isn't this what is all going to determine the locality factors, right? So earlier we had seen them in silos, but of course these are going to work in a proper manner. Fine. So try to draw, you may not be able to draw everything. You have 5 major points, okay, which are themselves linked to 5 other points. Okay. Landscape morphology, which means topographic, microclimate, climatic factors, soil, land use and vegetation can be biotic factors. So that is how you can explain this whole part here. Okay. Okay. Now let us also have a discussion on the biotic factors, and then we'll try to condense all of this. Fine. Now talking of the biotic factors, the biotic factors are our living factors, right? So we have producers, which are the autotrophs, the plants which are going to make the food through the process of photosynthesis in the presence of solar energy or sunlight. Okay. We also have consumers. Okay. Consumers can be, we can have primary consumers, we can have secondary consumers, right? Right from herbivores, which will eat the plants, to the carnivores, which will eat the herbivores. Okay. We have seen the aspects of food chain. Okay. Then we have the aspects like decomposers, right? Decomposers can also mean, okay, so again we can have bacterias, the fungus, molds, these are all decomposers, right? Now when we see the biotic factors, now for example if there are plants available, so first of all there is going to be an interaction between the plants themselves. Okay. If the plants are very close together, okay, we can even talk about things like allelopathy, things like competition, okay, parasitism, predation, etc. So there are a lot of factors that will go through here, right? So we'll also have a look at what are the biotic factors, for example, which are going to help us understand, right? So when we talk about overall how the biotic factors are going to be, so here also just a couple of let's say points that we can understand for our own reference, right? That for example, what is the role of biotic factors in this whole discussion, right? So if you want to write, or okay, for example if I'm talking of what is the influence of wild animals here, okay, or before that just remember what are the species interactions. This is something we've already done, but this question has also been asked in paper 2B. Okay, so right from, or even in 1B we can say that, right, in the environment and conservation part. So right from mutualism, and one example each you should remember: commensalism, amensalism, parasitism, predation, okay, competition. Mutualism is no, both are benefited, plus plus. Examples like corals, okay, examples like mycorrhiza, examples like lichens. Commensalism is one is benefited, the other is not. Okay, so here for example we have seen the case of epiphytes. Okay, amensalism for the other hand is minus and zero. Again a big tree and a small tree. The big tree is getting all the light. The small tree, because of the big tree, is not able to get the light. Okay, so big tree is, a small tree is negatively impacted, but the big tree is not impacted by the presence of small tree. That is minus and zero. Parasitism is the parasite which is on the host. Parasite is getting all the nutrition, but the host is the one that is getting the problem. Okay, predation is, for example, we can say predator and a prey relation, here also plus and minus. And in competition, both minus, both will be negatively impacted because of the vegetation that is, let's say, very scarce. The resources are less, so because of the scarcity of the resources, we'll see in the species interaction what the whole thing is all about. Okay, so that is one part that we can say. Now when we talk about influence of wild animals, so one of course is, for example, the wild animals. Okay, one aspect can be, they can be grazing. Okay, the animals itself can play a bearing on the forests that are available, the, for example, the monkeys, okay, or the other pollinating insect parts. So here also there is a positive part also and a negative part also. Okay, the negative would be then when there is a lot of competition that is going to happen. Okay, but even remember here we had also say the impact of man. Okay, so here also is one part right from deforestation. Now in domestication, think about the cattles, and one of the major issues that we see is not grazing. Grazing is fine, we want controlled grazing, but the problem is overgrazing. That is going to be a problem. Okay, here also you can just remember one example of allelopathy that can be linked to the part of amensalism here. Okay, so how the domestication, again these are aspects you can easily understand right from here. Plus in forest protection and other areas we see this in more detail in paper 2B. Okay, grazing, I've already told you that overgrazing is a problem, and it is controlled grazing that is overall better. In addition to this, even the forest fires can also play a huge role, right? So this is there. And here also in biotic factors, while directly not linked to this, climate change will also influence a lot of biotic factors. Why? Because of increasing species extinction. Okay, so this also can be one of the parts that we can remember here. Okay, then we're talking of plants. Plants can face injuries like we have seen, be it because of wind, be it because of snow or of frost. Okay, or because of mechanical bending, or even the interruptions that can happen. So in the, that is some of the injuries, plus the injuries because of pests. Okay, think about the different bollworms, okay, the fall army worms, the locusts. So there are many aphids, okay, specific diseases that will happen. So plants will also face injuries, that is a problem. Okay, injuries due to domestic animals, this can be because of, again, the kind of interruptions, okay, that will happen. So be it domestic animals or wild animals, this will, so again these headings will again keep, you will keep this in mind, that when you write about animals, wild animals is one. Okay, so here also remember, for example, the nilgai, etc., that will attack. Okay, then in this, so I'll write this all one in one guess. For example, nilgai, we can overall talk about the invasive alien species. Here also we'll give some examples. Okay, for domesticated we can understand the major issue in this is going to be overgrazing. Okay, now when I talk about the invasive species, okay, plus there is also, see, for wild animals, remember the concept of vermins, that because they cause nuisance, because they cause injury, they can even hamper the law and order. That is a problem. Plus there is also a theme of, very important part, human animal conflict. That will be a recurring theme throughout our discussion, that one of the objectives of forest management also is to reduce the human animal conflict. In paper 2B we do this in more detail, right? Now one by one we'll see some examples. So nilgai is just one example of how the animals can also damage the humans and even impact the overall produce vegetation. Invasive species are there, so some famous examples I'll write down. For example, you can say Lantana camara, Prosopis juliflora is also there in your syllabus, okay, which is also known as the Angrezi babool. Okay, For example, water hyacinth, right? The popular or the populous species. Okay, let's say the populous deltoids, okay, which also we'll have a look at later on. The point is these invasive alien species are also leading to a problem, right? Because these are non-native species, and because these are non-native species, there is no natural predator for them, and because there is no natural predator, and because of no natural predator, what happens? Their population increases. If the population increases, they will eat more resources, which will lead to lack of resources for native species, and ultimately they will outcompete the native species. Okay, so that is a problem. For domesticated animals, etc., we already know what is the issue, right? Majorly because of overgrazing. Then vermins are then, of course, initially in the Wildlife Protection Act there was a specific schedule, okay, the schedule 5 for this, but in the amendment to the Wildlife Protection Act, now we know that this schedule is not present. Okay, so then again through an order, through the gazette notification, this would be carried out. And overall, increasing human animal conflict is there. This also shows a biotic factor, and this factor can be overall taken into account through better management. Okay, so these are some of the important aspects that one has to remember and understand with respect to all the important biotic factors that we have seen so far. Okay, that you will overall have a look at. Okay, so that is one. Just a second. Okay, now this part, how the forest influence their environment. Okay, we've already covered the ecosystem services provided by forest. We've seen more than 16 points. You can use that also, right? Today also you got certain idea how they influence air temperature, how they influence soil temperature. You can still have an idea. For air and soil temperature, I'll still make you write down. Okay, so you can even mention that. Okay, and this is also a heading where you have to try to practice and answer what is the influence of forest on the environment. Now use the keywords like how they influence the microclimate, and you have to make it as specific, okay, as possible. Okay, so at least the air temperature and water temperature part I'll just make you write down. Okay, so that we still have some important points. You have some important points to note and write. Okay, right. Before that, just one small heading of biotic factors, because for biotic there is a lot of things. So very small part I'll just mention to you. That should be there in your notes. Okay. Okay, so very first part here is plant animal interactions. On only one very short points we'll just write down. For example, the first part we are writing is plant animal interactions. Plant animal interactions. Okay. So here just one example you can write. In the teak forests of Madhya Pradesh, Tectona grandis, management practices consider the role of insect pollinators. Management practices consider the role of insect pollinators. By the way, when I say plant animal interactions, we also referring to insects. We can even talk about herbivores. Herbivores can also help in seed dispersal. Okay. Management practices consider the role of insect pollinators in seed production. Another important part is pest Pest and disease management. This is again a biotic factor. Pest and disease management. Okay. So here you can write down understanding pests, pathogens and their natural enemies. Understanding pests, pathogens and their natural enemies have led to biocontrol management strategies. Biocontrol management strategies. For example, I can talk about the sal borer. Even this has been studied extensively because we're talking of pest and disease management. We're talking of biocontrol methods. Okay, so plant animal interactions, one point. Pest disease is another point. Okay. For symbiotic, I've given you certain examples. Either you can talk about mycorrhiza, even rhizobium. Okay. Mycorrhiza, you can link it to edaphic factors also. You can give an example, but one line I want you to write down. Okay. Example is Casuarina plantations. See, Casuarina equisetifolia these are good examples for coastal plantations. So when we are talking of the part of Casuarina, so here Frankia. See, remember in the root nodules, the microorganisms are helping in nitrogen fixation. So in Casuarina, just write down in Casuarina plantations in coastal Tamil Nadu. Casuarina plantations in coastal Tamil Nadu relies on effective Frankia nodulation, which means the nodules. Relies on effective Frankia nodulation. Okay. Fourth can be invasive species management. Okay, so you can write down one example. Management of Lantana Camara in Bandipura Tiger Reserve. By the way, it's also found in other parts of India, but this is a specific example. Bandipur National Park or the Bandipur Tiger Reserve. Okay, the management of this is an important silvicultural practice. Okay. Human animal conflict is another part you can write down. For example, now for human conflict you can talk about either the Shola forests or overall Western Ghats. Here human elephant conflict prevention is a very important theme. These are diverse examples that you see for biotic factors. Okay, and you can use them in your answer very easily. Fine, I hope this part is clear. On the temperature front, it is very easy to understand. For example, I think the UPSC had asked you two parts. Okay, forests, how can forest or how do forests influence air temperature and overall soil temperature? Okay, so now if we want to say that in general, just imagine, for example, these are your forests. Overall, what will be certain points which will impact? Okay, so I can club this into certain points. See, forests will impact evapotranspiration, or I can even use them as separate points. For example, evaporation is influenced by these forests. They will also influence transpiration. Even albedo, even shading is going to change and how we see temperature. That is one. Plus another part, for example, if the wind is coming in, later on we'll see example of wind breaks and shelter belts. The idea here is they will reduce the speed of incoming wind to a large extent, deflect it overall. So even the aspect of wind, speed reduction of wind also helps. There is a reduction of wind speed that also happens. So remember this, all these factors are going to contribute to temperature or the changes in temperature, right? For the soil temperature, I've already additionally told you the leaf litter that will fall down, okay, which will again form a covering, okay, and the overall nutrient balance and the soil composition. So soil temperature is going to be cooler because of shading. Temperature is cooler, okay. Again, we've seen examples of urban areas and rural areas. The cooling effect that overall happens in the forest related regions, okay. So these are some of the points that you can overall have a note, okay. So here just a couple of lines that you perhaps can even write down, okay, because this question has already been asked, so we can overall have certain points that we can always write. Okay, so one part you can write down, trees release water vapor, hence they cool the surrounding air. So again, I will combine both evaporation, transpiration, they will release the water vapor. This will cool the surrounding air. Okay. Then when we see this canopies, the forest canopies are also going to reflect the radiation. Albedo is the reflectivity. So we will write forest canopies affect the reflection of solar radiation. Forest canopies affect the reflection of solar radiation. Okay, next, when we say shading, so here you can write the tree canopies intercept sunlight. The tree canopies intercept sunlight, reducing ground heating. The tree canopies intercept sunlight, reducing the ground heating. Okay. And they affect the distribution of speed of wind or the movement of wind speed, which impacts or which will alter the air temperature. Okay. So just write down one, the forest alter the air movement. Forests alter the air movement, which affects the heat distribution. The forests alter the air movement, which alters the heat distribution. So even this part. So again, my point is, whatever questions, first go through the previous questions also. If there's an issue, you can directly reach out to us, or right, you already have the contact numbers. So here, don't be in any doubt. If there's any very even simple point, you think it is simple and you are still not able to figure it out, directly reach out. That will be understood. We'll also have it done. We'll do it. Now, again, this is the part I had already shown it to you. Forests have a moderating impact on soil and water temperature. Now try to do this. Okay, now you have enough points. The other 3 points already I had given you as a homework. I hope you would have done. Some of you have already sent it, so that's good. Fine. Now, when we overall club all the parts here, now this question has already been asked. So, but this question you will be able to now appreciate, because now you've done all the locality factors. We have seen biotic factors, we have seen edaphic factors, climatic factors, topographic factors. Fine. And there is a lot of detail in these factors, right? Plus, as we move along, you have to note down certain areas. Achha, in this area, this is happening. In this, let's say, clear felling system and things that we see later on, this is the practice, this is being done. Fine. So that is how you'll be understanding the whole chapter and the whole parts in a better manner. Fine. Now, how locality factors affect site-specific planning? A direct question that is there to us. Fine. Now here, directly, you can divide this answer into the 4 headings, and for each of the headings you have points. Okay, for the sake of the completion, I'll just go through the points that I have outlined here. Around 10 or around 12 points are there. Fine, but my point is you can structure it better in the 4 or 5 dimensions that we have seen. Fine. Now, climate and weather conditions, sure, right? It affects the choice of trees. Okay, because different species survive in different temperature ranges, moisture ranges. Okay, so the planting schedule, harvesting, fire risk, pest, disease, everything is going to be influenced by the climate and weather conditions. That's a fair point. Okay, even the soil, which for us is the edaphic. So of course, some trees prefer well draining soils, some want wetter or some wants dry conditions. Okay, topography or terrain is an important part, right? Steep slopes may require erosion control. We've already seen it. Okay, and we need to have a very careful planting here, so that we want to prevent the runoff, soil runoff, right? In the same manner, if you have a flat terrain, you directly have a straightforward access. So here it is not very complicated when we talk about the flat terrain, right? Talking of elevation, okay, or the aspect, remember higher elevation has cooler temperatures. Fine. So the trees which are suitable will be limited here. Okay, aspect, which means again the direction which the slope faces, okay, towards the sunlight here overall, it influences the exposure. This also we have seen, which influences the microclimate. Okay, water availability, again drier sites are also there, which will require supplemental irrigation, but this will require drought hardy species. Okay, wetlands and local bodies, again a different kind of ecosystem that is present. Okay, now local biodiversity, this is biodiversity is related to the biotic factors here. Fine. So native species are preferred. This is the point you have to put a star mark wherever possible. Mention, be it afforestation. Okay, we will write that as much as possible we will prefer the native species for ecological conservation. Okay, then pest and disease dynamic. So local pests, disease, pressures, etc. This will affect the choice of the species that we have. Okay, so pest and disease we have already seen. We've already seen the examples. I am giving you points for certain points you can even write an example. You will not be able to write example for all the points. That is understandable. You don't have to worry about it. Okay, even cultural and historical factors. This is also linked to the socio-economic aspect. Think about the tribal people. Okay, people who are very closer to nature in nature conservation practices, right? So local cultural practices, indigenous knowledge may influence the selection of species, the management approach. Fair point. Okay, economic considerations, right? What is the demand of timber in the market? Okay, wood in industries at what time? So this is also, and what time the processing will be done, logistics, transportation. Even this is going to be very important for site specific planning. I can replace this question as what are the locality factors which influence or affect a plantation? Same answer you can write, right? Because see, site specific planning simply means you cannot have a one size fits all approach. Okay, for the coastal areas approach is different, for central areas it is different. This is also what we have to see. That is why the knowledge of the soil, agroclimatic zones, okay, these are very important to understand, right? Regulatory and a policy framework. Okay, so this is also an important part, because this is going to be the protected area. What are the conservation strategies? What is the harvesting method that we have, right? Socio-economic context, we understood how we can link the social and the human aspect here. Infrastructure and access, this also can be one part. Okay, right from how much road, rail connectivity, okay, management standards, practices, transport, how all these things can be integrated for an overall better part or better understanding. Okay, so when you see these factors, you will also understand Okay, now my question to you will be, and this is where I'll end today, what are the different factors that are governing the successful introduction of exotics? What are the certain factors that are influencing the successful reintroduction or introduction of exotic species? Okay, already the answer is in front of you. You can use this framework, but my point is the questions are different, but the idea behind them is same. Fine. So the more you practice questions like this, the better you will get in your understanding. Okay. So the other part, which is again site quality, this will take some time to explain to you the stands and age, which I think I'll take up in the next part here. Okay. So at this part we'll try to end. Okay. Before summarizing, just in case somebody wants to reach out directly, if you want to speak to me, in any case, if you're writing the Forest Services Mains overall, if you want to have any assistance on your strategy, guidance, etc., and specific with respect to the Forestry Optional, you can reach out. Okay. Or if you want to know about any of the courses that may assist you in the preparation for the Indian Forest Services Mains, or even for 25-26, we already have some courses which may be of assistance to you in case you need so, right? In addition to that, we already have a Telegram channel for forestry. Okay, so you can see Forestry Optional _ Sunya, that is our Telegram channel on which a lot of updates, strategies, notes, etc. we are also sharing that. So you can also have a look at it and you can avail the benefits out of that also. Okay. So with that said, till now I think we've covered a basic important part of silviculture, right? So I hope that gives you a fair idea about how to go to these topics. The way I consolidated this is going to be very much beneficial and handy when you attempt. Okay, so try to keep a tab on this, revise these examples only in a short 3 span of classes. We've covered a certain area, so I think that will always help you. Fine. So with that, we'll call it. Okay, we'll end the class here. We'll meet you shortly. Thank you.